welcome to another program of Guyanese Morning Time. It is 6 minutes past the 7 o'clock hour. Of course, you know we had our own challenges, but we deal with them. We take them in strides. Yeah, I don't know what they did to us this morning, but they gave me a little trouble. Knock off the program and so on and so forth. But it's alright, we shall get by, we shall overcome all the time, don't worry yourself. It's Wednesday, Dr. HINDS is in the house as usual, and we're going to be talking with him. But as usual, let me ask you, how was your yesterday? How you passed it yesterday? Last night? How you make out? You make some money yesterday? You get by yesterday? You catch any slaves yesterday? Or you end up on the slave catching business? Right? Those are some of the things I want to know. Were you able to rest and recuperate? Are you reinvigorated today? What are your projects for today? What do you plan to conquer? Good? Let me also remind you that, you know, on in fact, tomorrow at the Tipperary Hall from 6:30, we are going to have the UC GUYANA Emancipation Symposium. It has become an annual thing now, and it starts at 6:30 tomorrow evening at the Tipperary Hall. The topic is centering racial equality in an oil-rich Guyana. Your presenters include Nigel London, Vincent Alexander, Simona Booms, G.H.K. Lyle, Nigel Hughes, Dr. David Hines, Royce Ford, and Dwayne Benjamin. So come out and bring out the young people also at 6:30 tomorrow. That's the 10th of August at Tipperary Hall. Come out and let's have this discourse. Then on the 13th, step across to the Critchlow Labour College there, and the Coffee 250 Committee invites you to its 10th annual forum entitled The State of African Guyanese in a One-Sided One Guyana. That starts at 1 o'clock and is likely to go until about 5. Your presenters there again would be Vincent Alexander, Nigel Hughes, Don Cushholder, Kimani Nehusi, David Hines, Aubrey Norton, and Paul Slow. So go on over to that. On Friday, that's the 11th, we are hosting a youth culture camp right here at Club Twilight. We want you to encourage your young people. Age really doesn't matter. Bring out the young people, and even those who are considered not so young and would like to be part of the culture camp. It's basically a gathering to discuss cultural history and stuff like that, you know, cultural education, let me call it that broadly. Good? And so you can come out, with the children, and we can have a sit down from 10 o'clock to 1. Snacks will be provided. So come on down and let's educate our now generation so that they can do the same for the next generation. You know, it's interesting how we take for granted our culture, right? And the significant aspects of our culture and so on. And we are losing it slowly, quite frankly, because a lot of people are not aware of what are some of our cultural practices. You ever hear about 9 day and so, right? 9 day when picnic barn and dead walk and all those kind of things, they are part of our culture, you know, but we don't even pay attention to them. Imagine, and a Kwekwe party is planned for Club Twilight on the 27th of August as part of restoring, maintaining, educating about the cultural practices of our people. Imagine I am advertising a cultural party and people ask, a Kwekwe party, and people ask me, Mr. Sam is a Kwekwe. Right? And that is why it's important that we have these discourses with the youngsters and do these kind of events, because we really are losing our way and we adapting the other people's way, and that is why everybody is happy to play Pagwa and so on and so forth. Nobody pays attention to Kwanzaa, and nobody pays attention to where's a 9 day and where's Kwekwe and some of the practices at Wake House and so on. Dead houses we call it sometimes. Good? But keep that in mind. So we are going to continue to do our work culturally and politically, all as a part of empowering the people. Good? Keep that in mind. Spread the word, share the program, because, you know, when it cut off, a lot of people think we're done for the day. So share the program. Let's build the audience back. Dr. Hines, it's 7 minutes. It's 11 minutes past the 7 o'clock hour. How you been keeping?
Thanks. Working as usual.
I know you had a couple trips around the place. Working trips, if I can call them that. I know for a fact that you've gone to East Berbice twice. I mean West
West
Berbice.
Bobbies. West Bobbies.
Yes, West Berbice. You were at Hope Town, and then
Belgium.
last Sunday we were at Belgium. You were at, and then last Sunday we were at Tingley, right? Um,
Yes.
Tell us, what went on at Belgium, because of course people want to know when the professor walks, what the professor observes.
Well, people celebrating celebrating emancipation. Your comments just now about culture and retainance of culture um, are important. You see, our culture is not synonymous with the state. The state meaning that apparatus that governs the country on a day-to-day basis. And so when we talk about the state, we're talking about those overarching institutions that are tasked with managing the country. Institutions such as the coercive arms of the state, the police, the army, etc., the economic arms of the state, the businesses that the state owns, and then the cultural arms of the state. So this state that we are living in, African culture is not synonymous with the state, although African people live in the state. We are a multi-ethnic society, and so therefore no one culture is synonymous with the state. If you go to a place like Israel, for example, Jewish culture is synonymous with the state by law. Or you go to a place like Korea, where 90-something% of the people are Koreans. The state and Korean culture are synonymous. You go to African countries, you would find the same thing, because the societies are homogeneous. But we live in a heterogeneous society, and so no one culture is synonymous with the state. But so when you look at it, for example, Emancipation Day is the only African cultural holiday that you have. The only cultural holiday. Some people may argue that Mashramani, because it's heavily grounded in carnival, and carnival for the most part is being African. Some may argue that Mashramani is a kind of African holiday, but Mashramani is more oriented towards multi-ethnicity. The very name Mashramani is not African, is Amerindian, and so on. So the state does not promote African culture. Really, the state is supposed to promote all cultures. But our state does not promote cultures, in particular African culture. There are several holidays there are more holidays that are grounded in the East Indian community, for example. You have Pagwa, Diwali, Eid ul-Azha, and Yumanabi, and so forth. Those are religious holidays that are grounded in the Indian community. And Amerindians, there is an Amerindian month, what we call Heritage Month. So in many regards, African culture is least promoted by the state. So it is no accident then that African culture is not necessarily known by Africans. See, sometimes we blame ourselves and we blame people. You know, you're not into your culture and so on. Culture is something that is, you know, people have to be aware of it. And so you have the state and the media. The media is another agent of socialization. The media is another agent of socialization. And the media promotes popular culture, popular music, reggae, calypso, hip-hop, and so on. It doesn't promote indigenous culture, indigenous music. When I was coming up, you had one or two programs on the radio that would promote African culture. Wordsworth McAndrew, and then Tom Dalgett, he had a program. You had one and two programs would promote African culture in the media. And today you practically have none. So when you have the agents of socialization, because people are socialized through what we call agents, the family, the state, the media, etc. If the agents of socialization are not socializing people to know and embrace and practice their culture on a day-to-day basis, you are not going to find people holding on to those cultures, you know. African culture is a once-a-year thing. Emancipation come around, we have a good time, and that's it. That's it, you know. So your complaint is in order, but as I've been trying to do for the last couple of minutes, is to show that what you're asking for doesn't happen just like that. You know, your children are born and they're socialized into the society. And if the culture that you're talking about is not part of that socialization, it does happen. Again, when I was younger, the communities promoted African cultures, you know, on a regular basis. People get married every day. You had where people die, you had Nancy's story and so on and so forth and thing. What you've found over the last couple of decades is marriage ceremonies are now, you know, fully party, westernized party. So, you know, you go to a marriage, a wedding eve, as you would call it, and, you know, you have no one-man band and stereo and so on. You go to a wake, one-man band and stereo. That's where the technology has gone. And so the technology has replaced the community socialization of our culture. So it's no accident that our younger people coming through are not aware of these cultures, or if they know of them, they know of them in name, not in practice. They know of them in name and not in practice. So it's a combination of the state, the media, the agents of socialization that are, if you will, drowning out African culture. In Trinidad, for example, they complain a lot. They have carnival and carnival and calypso are intertwined, and it's the national music. So you have more of a connection to some aspect of African culture there. But even in Trinidad, they complain that after Carnival, the radio stations don't play Calypso. And if they play Calypso, they play, you know, the kind of dancehall version rather than the real authentic Calypso. Jamaica is much different. Reggae music is the gateway to Jamaican culture. And reggae music is 24/7. Reggae is part of the everyday culture of Jamaica. So Jamaica is an exception in that regard, that you have more of an into the culture through reggae. Here in Guyana, because we don't have a national music in terms of African Guyanese, we don't have that kind of entree that they have in Trinidad and Jamaica and, you know, the Eastern Caribbean islands and so on. And because of the nature of our society, you have competing cultures. And you find that whenever the PPP is in power, there's much more of an official state emphasis on the culture of their supporters. Whenever the PNC is in power, they don't do the same for African, because the African leadership in Guyana, and we were discussing this last night on Politics 101, attempt to embrace a kind of universalist, non-sectarian approach to public life, to politics, the culture, and so on. So the PNC is less likely to emphasize African culture. And so therefore, as the PPP do when they are in office, the institutions and the state and so on push Indian culture. And even if they don't want to push it, they're pressured to push it by their constituencies. African people are different, because our African leaders tend to be non-racial. They take a non-racial attitude to governance. And so the racial identity, the ethnic identity, the cultural identity of their supporters are never perpetuated through the state. And African Guyanese, on the other hand, are less likely over the years, they've been less likely to pressure their political leaders to push their own culture. Except for Carifesto and Gaifesto and so on in the early years of the PNC, And a lot of that had to do with the relationship between the PNC and ASCREA. ASCREA was the kind of African culture, and it was a very powerful organization. And ASCREA leader Guyana was part of the political architecture of the country. So there was more a fusion of politics, African politics and culture in the 60s, in the 70s. Once that relationship between ASCREA and the PNC ended, there was less emphasis by the PNC on African culture. And so by the time we got to the 80s and the 90s, it was non-existent. It was non-existent. The leading African cultural organizations like AGDA and First of August Movement, etc., Coffee 250, they did not enjoy the same kind of relationship with the governing elite that ASCREA enjoyed. David Granger was somewhat of an exception. He did one thing, and that is he recognized the International Decade of the People of African Descent, but he didn't involve the state in it. He gave a subvention to IPADG, and IPADG operated outside of the state. So even though Granger recognized the decade, the state was not actively involved in promoting the decade. It was left to IPADG. So I gave that long explanation, description, overview, whatever we call it. You know, I'm a teacher, I can't help myself sometimes. To really address the question you were raising. It's a pertinent question, but the solution to it is not as simple as saying, you know, we're losing the culture and people, you know, not embracing their culture, they don't know, and so on. All those are things you said are true. But what I've attempted to do is to explain why. And you have to understand why there is a problem. You have to diagnose the problem in order to solve the problem. It means, therefore, that our state, our media, our communities, meaning community leadership, have to be more actively involved in promoting the culture. Not just African culture, but they have to promote all cultures. Indians don't have the same complaint that we have, largely because their religions, their religious institutions are 24/7 institutions. And so their cultures come out through their religion, and their religion is 24/7. Our religion in the African Guyanese community are by and large Christian religions, which separate themselves are from 24/7 institutions. So there in the African Guyanese community are by and large yes, our Africans are generally in the traditional Christian churches, and they separate themselves from indigenous African culture. Unlike the Hindu and Muslim culture among Indians, which are not separating from Indian culture. They are what you call indigenous churches, those faithist churches, comfort churches. They promote African culture. But a minority of Africans worship in those churches, a tiny minority. So the agents of socialization, state, media, religion, education system, etc., are not promoting the culture. Some communities are a little bit lucky. Our community in Buxton, for example, the political leadership in our community, which over the last, from the 1960s to the present, have been largely ASCREA/WPA, and we have always twinned culture and politics and economics. So in a place like Buxton, you get a little bit more of the promotion of the culture and a little bit more of the socializing. So the average child in Buxton is aware of Kwekwe, aware of Kakali. They are aware of somebody called Brian Chester who do Kwekwe and Nancy and so on. They may not be as steeped as they should be, but at least they're a little bit more aware. And again, like I said, it is because of leadership. The leadership, the political leadership, which is usually the leadership in the communities, they promote the culture to some extent. And this happens in some of the West Bobese communities, I am reliably informed. There is some of the promotion of the culture, Hope Town with its soiree and Belladrum and some of those communities. One or two, I think, on the West Coast. I don't know how much is done in places like Baggotsville, where it used to be very, very rich. Then Amstel. I think Baggotsville does some of it. But the point I'm making is that for cultures to survive, they have to be promoted. Because indigenous cultures are always competing with new cultural formations, with new technology. So in order for indigenous cultures to survive, they have to be promoted by the agents of socialization.
For that long explanation and response. In your response there, you made a connection between the politics, as in the state, and the cultural. There are a lot of people who ever so often try to tell us that, listen, you gotta separate politics from culture. Just yesterday, I had Miranda Brown on the program saying every time we talk about what the ancestors went through and slavery and so on. If we're going to continue another 100 million years to hold on to that, what's your response to these people saying separate politics from culture?
Well, whether you separate it or not, it's not separated. Because it is the human being that is the political leader. And when a person becomes a political leader, a person doesn't stop being African or stop being Indian or stop being Amerindian or Chinese. It's there. It is whether that person is of the persuasion, of the school of thought, that believes that the state has a role in promoting culture. And yes, there are people who take that view. There's a school of thought that says that culture is separate from politics. We have to say that's nonsensical. Because what are you going to do when I become a political leader? You're going to cut off a piece of my head and say, well, that goes to culture. Or you're going to cut out two of my fingers and say that goes to culture and this goes to politics. It doesn't work like that. You know? Human beings are not robots. Although they try to make us into robots. But human beings are not robots. The human being is the embodiment of everything that a human being embodies. Cultural instincts, political instincts, economic instincts. And they're all holistically interrelated in the body and the mind and the soul of the being. So whoever that person is coming from the viewpoint that the human being is a robot. You can regulate the human being and set from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock you're going to be a cultural being, and from 10 to 12 you're going to be a political being. No.
But what about these people who constantly tell us to forget the experiences of enslavement and oppression and so on? And they don't tell the Jews, for example, to forget the Holocaust.
Well, yeah, some people tell the Jews. You can tell people nothing's wrong in telling people to forget. And you can make people forget. You can socialize them to forget. You can erase it from the education system. Again, education is an agent of socialization. You can erase people's past. And if you erase the past from the education system, from the media, from the state, then people will forget. People will forget.
So is it... Go ahead.
But when you forget, you then become a group of people with no points of reference. And after time, people then begin to grope. People begin to ask questions. Why there is no point of reference? Take a place like the Soviet Union. Had a revolution in 1917, and they brought together all those cultural, the Ukraine, Belarus, Russia. They brought them all together and they created a new socialist man. And this new socialist man was supposed to be devoid of his or her cultural beings. But the minute the Berlin Wall fell and communism came to an end, all of those socialist men, they went back to their culture. Look what the Ukraine is fighting against Russia. There are two ethnic groups. Under the Soviet Union, they weren't ethnic groups, and so on. So it's difficult to have people forget their history. You can use the state to compel them to forget it. It doesn't mean they forget it. I mean, slavery was meant to crush African culture. And in many regards, what slavery did was to cut off the African from his roots or roots. But since slavery has ended, African people have been constantly in that project of reconnecting with their African roots. It's been difficult because they've been cut off for 400 years. That's a long, long time. But even 400 years did not totally. I mean, when you listen to some of the songs, you know, fly away home to Zion. You know, it was all about swim back to Africa. Fly away to Africa. Ice your bundle and go back to Africa. It's constant in people's minds. And so there are two factors. There's always the push factor and the pull factor. You know, the pull factor to pull people away from their roots. And there's always the push factor of people wanting to reconnect with their roots. And that's going on. And sometimes the push overpowers the pull. But at the end of the day, human beings will act as human beings.
And so this socialization, this pull and push factor to force people or get people to forget their roots and so on. Are we seeing what I should say snippets of that playing out in this country? Because
no, it's not just snippets. It's more than snippets. If you want to control people, the first thing you want to do is to make them culturally naked. They show, because culture is the basis of everything. You know, the simple definition of culture is way of life. So that gives you, you know, if you can, because that's part of what was done during slavery, right? The more you suppress the slave culturally, the more you are likely to get the slave to believe that he or she was born to be a slave. That was the theme, right? And there was always that struggle. And our present rulers, including black leaders, because remember, the PNC always wanted to create this new Guyanese man. And I don't think their intention was for the African man to go away. But in putting such emphasis on the Guyanese man, they then set up a competition between the Guyanese and the African. And you listen to black people to this day, a lot of our people say that I'm Guyanese first. And that is because of the PNCs when they were in government and trying to, and not just PNC, it happened in Trinidad, in Jamaica, because all of them, after colonialism, wanted to create these new societies. Well, in places like Barbados and Jamaica and the Eastern Caribbean islands, where it was predominantly African, there was always a kind of coexistence of the African and the Antiguan. the African and the Jamaican. So the Jamaican became African. So you don't hear terms such as Afro-Jamaican or Afro-Antiguan because homogeneous. But in Trinidad and Guyana and Suriname, in trying to create this new identity, that new identity then was in competition with the old identity or the other identity, the African identity. And so at some point we have to begin to say Afro-Trinidadians, Afro-Guyanese, and so on. Right? So it happened on the PNC government, not intentionally. But today, with the PPP government wanting to dominate Africans, the state is now promoting. So when Ali talks about one Guyana, he knows that Hinduism and Islamism in the Indian community they are secure. And one Guyana is not going to overpower them because they're 24/7 religions. But they know that in the African community, there is not such a religious force. And so it is easy to tell an African about one Guyana, and he or she is going to go along with one Guyana at the expense of their ethnic culture, and that's what they're playing on. So people like yourself and myself become irritants. You you wear the shiki not just on 1st of August, we wear the shiki year round, and it's a caricature, so the caricatures that you're racist or you're a strange person or you're using black people and all of that kind of thing. And all of that is meant to remove the African, to separate the African from his or her Africanness. So you declare war on the cultural leaders. You make the cultural leaders look strange and dangerous. And the more you do that, you're able to separate the people from their culture. And the more the people are separated from their cultural moorings, the easier it is to get them into your net, your slogan of one Guyana, which is really meant to control them, right? It's more difficult to do it to Indians. Indians never embraced one people, one nation, one destiny. They never did. They never did. In the same way that Africans did. Indians only, and I'm saying this generally, I don't mean individual Indians, but for a long time, under the Burnham white government, Indian Guyanese didn't respect the national anthem and the pledge. They didn't give attention and so on. They begin to do that when the PPP comes into power. Then they start to respect the pledge and the flag and so on. Africans, regardless of who are in power, we put our hand to our chest quick and got attention quick. We are more attached to the national symbol of Guyana, partly because we feel that that's our culture, rather than our African culture, right? So yes, there are people who intentionally want African culture to be pushed into the background.
And so we can locate the current administration's fight with APARTHEID in that arena of wanting to push African culture in the background, destroy organizations that will promote and represent African culture and the interests of African Guyanese.
Yeah, it's part of the domination. You see, They don't get up and say, I want to get rid of African culture. There may be a couple of people who get up in the morning and say, I want to do that. But they get up in the morning and say, I want to control and dominate Guyana. And that means I have to dominate African Guyanese. And part of the process of domination is the de-emphasis of the culture. So the de-emphasis of the culture is as a result of the domination. Note what I said, right? When the PNC came to power in 1964, they wanted to build this new Guyana. The same thing in Trinidad and Jamaica and so on. They wanted to build this new identity, this new civic identity, right? And part of the emphasis on the new Guyanese man inadvertently led to the de-emphasis of the African man. Especially once ASCRA was closed down and there were no relationship between ASCRA and the PNC anymore, right? So part of trying to build the Guyanese man, a spin-off of that was the emphasis on the African man, the African woman. So it's not that these political leaders wake up and say, I want to de-emphasize the culture. The culture is de-emphasized through the policies that you promote, and the PPP in trying to promote the policy of domination automatically and logically in trying to dominate, you are going to de-emphasize the culture.
And so Dr. Hines commented for me on the establishment of this parallel organization to APARTHEID, the recent establishment, and in that I would like you to also address the willingness with some who are seen as leaders in the African Guyanese community to dance up and hug up and love up, and so with the representatives of the Ali government in a show of unity, Guyanese unity, one love on Emancipation Day.
Let me give you the second question first, because I think that's the more important question. There has always been a strand of African Guyanese, African Caribbean instinct. It's part of the old creolization process, to reach out to other cultures and so on, and there's always been that. The old redskin, what we call Afro-Saxon, that kind of the African who became British, became European, the Afro-Saxon, and that was as a result of education. They were educated in Britain and so on, and they came back, they spoke. You listen to a person like Burnham, and the way he spoke was quintessentially, Afro-Saxon, European, John Carter. The black middle class has always had that tendency. But now the British are gone. And so the new rulers are the Indian Guyanese elite. The Africans are not going to emulate the way the Indian Guyanese speak. They're not going to do that. But they're going to feel that these people represent power. And I have to accommodate that power. And so what you're seeing is the politics of accommodation. It happened everywhere. In the United States, you had the Booker T. Washington who accommodated with the white elites during segregation, right? So there's always been that accommodationist tendency in the African community. To some extent is in the Indian community, to some extent. Indians, there were Indians who accommodated, and I'm talking about the individual Indian, a fair enough group of them, critical mass, that accommodated with the PNC. The issue, the difference in the Indian community is that while they push themselves to accommodate, they're always pulled back by the strength of their culture. Because, Burnham and the PNC in the cosmos of the Indian community was the devil. So those Indians who gravitated to the PNC in Burnham were made to feel that they gravitated towards the devil, and they're cut off. They're cut off from the Indian community. So it is more difficult in the Indian community to play the accommodationist politics. In the African community, there are no sanctions. There are no cultural sanctions for the accommodationists. The accommodationist accommodates and goes back into the black community, and everything is normal. Hello, how are you doing? Drink with them. So there are no sanctions. So those who embrace the accommodationist outlook tend to be much more than in the Indian community. So it is that accommodationist that you're seeing there, accommodationist politics that has always been there. And sociologists have traced it back to the separation between the categories of slaves, the field slaves, the house slaves, and they were what you call industrial slaves. They were slaves who had skills. I mean, enslaved people, for example, who were mechanics. They would go from plantation to plantation to fix things on the plantation, and they were allowed to walk from plantation to plantation. They called them industrial slaves. So they had more privilege than even the house slave. See, we have to understand these categorizations. And then when you sociologically trace them, you tend to see why the African communities are not monolithic. People have different instincts and so on. And so people trace the accommodationist instinct right back to those enslaved people who enjoyed a little bit more quote-unquote privileges on the plantation and so on. It's an instinct. Because if you talk to those people, they will tell you, but I'm African, what is it, and they have an explanation. They say you have to be at the table, you have to be there, you have to engage these people. And they're right, but yet they're wrong. They're right in that you have to be at the table. They're wrong because it is not about individuals at the table. It is about groups at the table. And they don't represent the group because when they go there, they don't take the group with them. They represent themselves. And because they represent themselves, they're not able to bring back benefits to the group because they're not giving benefits to the group. They're giving benefits for themselves. So it's a very flawed thesis. It represents and gives benefit to the individual, but not to the group. Not to the group.
So if according to the categories, the industrial slave, the field slave, the house slave, if we were supposed to categorize these folks who currently are accommodating the PPP, which category they going to fall in?
Well, no, they're Accommodationist, I mean, you can say of slave feet because slavery is gone. You can just make comparisons. We don't have category like house slaves and so on. When we refer to somebody as house slave, we're making a comparison. And we have to be very careful with that comparison, because when we call them house slaves, are we insinuating that the rest of us are field slaves? You know? So you have to be very careful in taking those categorizations and use them. But we know what we mean when we refer to them as house slaves or Negroes. It's basically a comparison rather than a categorization. The real categorization is the accommodationist.
Dr. Hinds, over the last 2 or 3 years, let's say, there are those of us who have been examining the behavior of the government, who have gathered the evidence to highlight the fact that this current administration is apartheid, is oppressive. How does the behavior of the accommodationists impact the work which many of us have, quote unquote, painstakingly done to highlight the wickedness of this administration against African Guyanese, and to try to push back against it? How does that kind of accommodationist attitude and behavior impact what others are doing to ensure equity and equality and fairness and justice for the African Guyanese?
The impact is symbolic. Thank God. It's symbolic. In some instances, let's say in apartheid South Africa, it was more than symbolic, because the apartheid rulers were much more systematic. Last night we were talking about the parallel organization that was formed by the PPP, and which you asked me about just now. And that is taken straight out of the playbook of the apartheid regime in South Africa, and in some regard out of the segregationist regime in the United States. In South Africa, they created by law something called the Homeland of Bantustans. And, you know, the Africans were put in those townships, homelands as they call them. And in a sense, they became citizens. They had their own past papers and so on. They weren't. It was a way of separating them from white people and putting them in their own space and making them believe that these Bantustans were the sum total of their existence. And over time, what the regime did, the apartheid regime did, was that it picked its own African leaders and put them in charge of the Bantustans. So the ANC people weren't the ones who they put in charge of these homelands. They put their own people. I remember Bishop Abel Moseria as a name that was popular in my time as being head of one of the townships. So the whole thing about parallel leaders and parallel organizations is an old tactic of separatist regimes. And that's what an apartheid regime means. It means apart or separate. In America, they didn't call it apartheid, they call it segregation, based on the principle of separate but equal, right? So the apartheid was just the name, segregation was just the name. In places like Guyana and the English-speaking Caribbean, we also had separation. It was called colonialism. The colonial society was a separate society, just as the apartheid society was, or the segregation society was. So the principle in all of those formulations, or like the one in Israel, it was separation, apartness, unequal thing. And so if you are separating people not as equals, in America, no, they said separate but equal. So the thesis there was that you're equal politically because the 14th Amendment said you have equality before the law. So you're equal politically, but you're separate because you're socially unequal. And the Supreme Court had to upgrade that, because when separate but equal was challenged in Virginia, where they gave monies to the school districts, and they gave more money to the white school districts than they gave to the one black school district in Richmond. The Richmond school district challenged, and the court had to say it's separate and unequal. So at some point, separate but equal was upgraded to separate and unequal, because it's difficult to be separate and equal, right? The logic of separateness is tied up with the logic of inequality, and that's what we are seeing in a place like Guyana, right? We are physically separate. We live in our own communities by and large. Amerindians live in the interior, blacks live in their villages, Indians live in their villages. So we are already apart physically. So it then becomes easy to be apart policy-wise. So when you're doing roads, you can do better roads in an Indian community than in a black community. It's easy. The principle of separateness, a physical separateness, plays in and is accommodating of the principle of superiority and inferiority. So you have superior services in one community, inferior services in another community, because they're already separate. So we have all the building blocks of an apartheid state. The laws are not apartheid. They're not. We don't have the same laws, let's say, as in segregationist America, or segregationist Israel, or segregationist apartheid South Africa. The separateness and unequalness were tied up in the law. We don't have it. It's not tied up in the law in Guyana. We are not de jure apartheid, but we are de facto. In fact, that's what de facto means. De jure means by law, and de facto means by facto. So in fact, we are a separate society, physically separate. And as a result of physical separation, as I said, it makes it easy for separation based on policy. So to get back to your question, in a place like South Africa, people like Bishop Mozeria, and I hope I get his name right, he had a following. He was a bishop. He was a member of a church, and so there were people who followed him. And so, insofar as he accommodated with the apartheid regime, he had people following him. Right? In Guyana, the accommodationists do not have mass support in the black community. So the way they impact the work that we are doing is more symbolically than in actual fact, right? But that could change if, for example, this new organization that they have formed, and the regime begins to funnel money through this new organization into the black community, then that symbolism could become reality, or certainly more than symbolism. Because what has happened is that the colonial state impoverished Africans. And so coming into independence, the African community didn't bring wealth into independence, as let's say the Chinese did, the East Indian elite did. They brought their wealth into the new independent state. The Africans didn't bring any generational wealth into the new independent state. The policy of Burnham was to try to create this state that is equal, this socialist state. And what socialism meant, in effect, was an equal distribution of wealth and equal distribution of state resources, sorry. Now, what equal distribution meant is that those who were in front remained in front, and those who were at the back remained back. So although Africans got some more resources under the Burnham regime, because there was not affirmative action, the African communities remained economically behind. Now, the resources came to the African communities, came through working in the armed forces, in the public service. So we became wage earners, and we were earning a better wage, but we were always behind those who were not wage earners and were earning their money from businesses. So while Burnham did steer resources to Africans, it was not done equitably. It was more equally. And that is why today we make the point that we want an equitable distribution. Right? Now, before the Burnham people beat me up here this morning, objectively, it would have been difficult for Burnham to share the resources equitably. Because remember, the Burnham regime was a minority regime. Africans were a minority. And so that minority regime had to constantly be appeasing the majority population, the Indians. So while Burnham was steering some resources to the black community, he could not cut off the resources from the Indian community because he had to appease them, because he was running a minority government. All right? And so he had to appease them, and so their resources never cut off. Dr. Jeffrey was making the point last night that while Jagan socialized Indians to hate Burnham and the PNC, to see them as devils, Burnham didn't do the same thing. He didn't socialize blacks to hate Indians and to hate Jagan and to see them as devils. And he couldn't do that in an objective way, because remember, he was running a minority government and he had to do a lot of appeasement. Right? Would he have done it differently if he were not a minority government? Maybe he would. Maybe he would. You see, the PPP is now able to steer more resources to the Indian community because they are not a quote-unquote minority government. They are an installed government, but they don't see themselves as minority. And so they have no compunctions about steering resources. They don't have to appease Africans. What they're trying to do is to capture Africans. And the way you capture Africans is that you put them in a state of dependency. You instead of initiating policies to pull them out of economic poverty, you implement policies to push them deeper into economic poverty. And then you come in as Father Christmas and give them some things, and then they will be grateful to you. And that is a way of capturing them and dominating them. All right? So, that now is symbolism, those people who are accommodated. But if their allowed to form organizations like the one that was formed, those organizations can then become the funnels for resources to, in a sense, capture Africans under the one Guyana, the one-sided one Guyana tent.
Thank you. You talked about the appeasement of the Fox-Burnham administration. We are just 3 years out of a government that one might not have considered minority, but I'm of the opinion that there was a lot and perhaps too much appeasement there. That has not really helped the African man. Your thoughts on that?
Well, the culture of appeasement is part of the PNC culture of governance. You see, Burnham did it because the objective situation, he had to do that. He had no choice. So for Burnham, it was tactical. The appeasement of East Indians was tactical in order that to remain in power. And what was tactical over time become a strategy. And so the strategy, the culture of governance in the PNC is one of what Jeffrey calls universalism. And is that universal, which is not a culture that says Africans are behind, and in order for them to catch up, you cannot have this universally one tide lifts all. You have to treat them differently. No, the PNC culture is not one like that. The appeasement over time moved from tactic to strategy. And so whenever you have had a PNC government, PNC-led government under the coalition, you had that same appeasement instinct influencing their governance. So they were never going to look at Africans and use state power to try to make Africans economically equal to others. To do that, you would have had to be equitable in your distribution, which means that you would have had to distribute more to Africans than to the other communities, more to Amerindians than to the other communities. And the PNC would, one can say they would never do it. Maybe the party would change as you go forward. Because after looking at what the PPP has done in terms of steering resources to its community, maybe the PNC would realize that that is the order of the day, and they may change their praxis. They may. But for now, I see no sign of that. The universalist thing is steeped in the PNC. The pragmatic approach is steeped there. The non-racial approach is steeped there. And once you have that kind of approach, you're not going to implement policies that go against the approach. Your policies are going to be pragmatic. They're going to be non-racial. And even the great United States of America, after segregation ended in the 1960s, the United States, by law, moved to affirmative action. They recognize that the logic of the opposite of segregation, which is integration, the logic of integration means that you had to make the black community much more empowered than they were, and they moved towards affirmative action. Now, 30 years later, 40 years later, they have begun to turn back affirmative action. But it was through affirmative action that you had the rise of the black middle class in the United States of America, right? It was through affirmative action that people like myself and others were able to go to university and become PhDs and so on and so forth, all right? Now, Guyana under the coalition didn't implement affirmative action. And I don't know that the Guyana under Aubrey Norton's PNC is going to go there. We don't know that. For that to happen, the thinking, the strategy, the culture of the PNC towards governance has to change.
You know, sometimes I smile while you gave that response, because I'm asking myself, if you're indicting the PNC, well, let me finish with the kind of analysis of the appeasement mentality. I am calling it that, of the PNC, and the possibility that it will never change. What then is the what should I say? What then is the reason, for want of a better word, for African Guyanese to support the PNC?
I think you're posing the wrong question. First of all, it's not an indictment. It's really an analysis that is pointing to what is and what is true. Right? It is the truth, and the PNC people will tell you that. You know, so I am not indicting the PNC. You note I said Burnham had to tactically go there. Right? And over time, Hoyt took it from tactic. It was under Hoyt that it morphed from tactic to strategy. And then since Hoyt coming under Granger, it became strategy. It became the culture of the PNC towards governance. And so when you pose the question, why should black people support the PNC? Well, we live in an ethnic society. Who are they going to go support the PPP? They have to support the PNC in ethnic societies. You support the party of your race. You know, it doesn't mean the party of your race is always correct in its attitude towards you. But there are several factors why you have to support the PNC. There are several factors why blacks in South Africa support the ANC, although the ANC in post-apartheid South Africa has not always been consistent in terms of empowering the majority black population in South Africa. You see? So, I don't think your question is a logical question. You know, why should blacks support the PNC? It's obvious why blacks should support the PNC. Or why blacks should support black-led political parties. Because, note, blacks who rebelled against the PNC, they first moved to the WPA, which to them was African. And then in the last 20 years or so, in the 2000s, when they rebelled against Corbyn's leadership, they moved to the AFC, which was led by Raphael Truckman. And once the coalition was formed, they moved away from Truckman and went back to the PNC/WPA. And know the Indians who rebelled against the PPP, they didn't come to the PNC, they moved to the Indian-led AFC. And then once they felt that the Indian-led PNC didn't do what they wanted to, they went back to the
Indian-led AFC.
The Indian-led AFC didn't do what they wanted the Indian-led AFC to do, they went back to the PPP. So there's every reason why the ethnic communities will support the party, even though the party is not doing as much as it should do for their ethnic groups.
Thank you. It's now 21 minutes past the 8 o'clock hour. I'm ready to open up the lines. Anything else you want to address, Dr. Hines?
No, Yeah.
The lines are open. 6225933 is the number to call. We're talking with Dr. Hinds about the usual things. This morning the discussion is mainly based in culture. I got a first call here. Wow, the lines are going to be hot this morning. Call here live, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, and a special good morning to Dr. Hinds.
Good morning,
Dr. Hinds, I'm glad for all that you're saying, but I still am imploring you to have a calling segment out of one of your 5 days program, because you would be giving out points, and then we cannot get to like engage you in meaningful, whether it's critical or good thing, whether it's a negative critical or a positive critical. Then we now have to channel your thoughts through this show, and I don't think that is fair. I know Kadaki gonna be vexed, but I like to talk from my heart and from my soul, and I try to stay on the straight.
Huh? I did have a call in last week.
That's news to me. Anyway, thanks for that. Moving along.
I'm agreeing with you. I said I started last week.
Okay.
I'm continuing this week. I think on Friday I'm going to have a call in.
Okay, thanks for the update. Now, but Kadaki started with things like there is this boy the embattled lawyer. You don't really have to talk much about him because we all know what he's good for. First, he was devout PNC. When he opened up his mouth and said all the military votes went to Granger, and that was wrong in the eyes of GCOM. He was graciously let down from the PNC party, and then he showed quite clearly that he had joined allegiance with the PPP. Then all of a sudden he scrambled up Yuvraj. Well, I don't know if he's still, but we all know that the particular lawyer is all about the place. He's a rolling stone. And he gathering no mass. You talk about Dr. Van West Charles. He did come to our village, and he was there to talk how much $1 billion the country spent to bring in the vaccine, the poison to kill people. And he was imploring people to take the COVID-19, whichever poison was available in Guyana. And I listened, I was at the meeting, and he as a doctor, I was a nursing assistant, not a staff nurse. And when COVID came on the scene, I started to follow it and explore it. And he as a doctor who went by far higher than me in medicine, in the medical field, was imploring people. So I wonder, what is he saying now that seeing that COVID is no longer the worldwide threat as it was supposed to be, that now many places don't even remember to ask you if you ever was being vaccinated against COVID. That's one. Now the pipe, I talk about the pipe, and we're not getting the water, and there is where people who openly throw away the PNC in order for a box of food, and then was a box of chow mein with some sausage and a bottle of drink, the smallest bottle of drink, for the party to see what is happening now. You can't even get water to do your small chores, much less you can't waste water now because you don't have. Now, this is something that is happening to me. I, for over 7 years, minus the 2 years from COVID, started to host a little program in the village to keep us centered on emancipation and slavery. So on the third Sunday of August, I would do a little concert with all the children, as many as possible. In the concert, I try to bring out the dramatical skills, like they got to learn the poems, they're going to do little dances and entertain. And when they are finished, within the process, I buy clothes, African clothes, and give them. Try to introduce African dishes and have a nice concert. When the concert is over, whether or not I get enough money at the door, because people are highly attention, the monies that I get, because I am running this thing. I don't want nobody to come to my house and slit my throat for the concert money. So I will take them out on little outings around the place. The last 2 years prior to COVID and last year, I took them to Linden. The first time many of them went to Linden was on the trip. When they saw the Forest Hill by Sue's like that, they study how they're going to meet up, and they got up if they're going to fall off. When we going down the hill, if the bus going to fall down, what squeals. By the time we completed the Forest Hill, everybody relaxed and we went. Now this year, I had the run-up for the same concert. So some children at the back decided to say they're going to act on the usual thing. When I look, the children, they ain't coming. Now last night I was at a meeting where I learned that the children would not be partaking in the concert because I am against people who voted for PPP. Now these children parents are one of the $40,000 worker children. So you see, when you talk that politics, you see how politics now, it's rearing its ugly head within children, because I vote PNC, and I don't care who you vote for. That's your business. That's why I was totally against people going in to the voting compartment and sharing who they voted for. We are seeing it now. Now these children who would have been given clothes, food, and a free trip to whatever destination I chose, all on my expense and that of the concert, because of the parents working for the PPPC with the 40 hours, the $40,000, they have debarred their children from being a part of the concert that would have been giving them something. Because when you take people out of your area and you go to another area, you're learning different places in your environment. Now you immediate the big environment, so you see what is going on. And those same children, I plant sugarcane, would come to, soon as I see the cane raise up, they come in. But Dr. Hines said, no, you're going to vex Aunt Kadaki. They can't draw no more.
Sorry about that. I don't want you to make me vex. When you going to vex, you're going to wrong talk. Y'all know me. I'm not going to allow you to wrong talk on the program. I'm saving it for myself sometimes. Sometimes you have to be tactical. Call it live. Good morning.
Morning, Dr. Hines. Morning, Kadaki. Dr. Hines, you touched on, or Kadaki asked you the question, or even said that, we've been told to forget our cultures, right? No one else is being told to forget our culture. It's your culture. For example, we here in Florida, our governor is going to take that thing out of the school, African studies out of school, and he's trying to implement Asian studies, where the Asian kids are pushing back on that. Don't use us as tools, right? Every single person who went through, like the bombing in Japan, they could talk about it. The slaves that went to South Africa to cut cane from India, that was kidnapped and went to South Africa to cut cane from India. The largest concentration of Indians out of India is in Durban. They could talk about their atrocities. The Jews could talk about their atrocities. Individuals will tell the Jews to shut them out and forget, but institutions will never say so. No government will say so. When the Chinese were being faced with problems here the other day when Biden got in, it is said that China said, look, you better take action or else we gonna do what we gotta do economically. Quickly, the Chinese got things straight. Black Lives Matter, no African leader could have called. One of the things that causes us, some people could tell us anything, is because we don't have economic power. All of these people that I called before got economic power. And if you only open your mouth and tell them something about their atrocity, they know how to hurt you. Look what happened with Kanye West. Individual, but institutions will never say so. The only institution I think will say things like that is Farrakhan, but no one else will say so. Unless we get economic power, right, they will never ever disrespect our past. They will stop disrespecting our past. Because we could shout about our past from top of the mountain once we get economic power. But as of now, we could shout how much we want. The people are going to continue to tell us, shut your mouth, forget about what happened to you. But we have to continue to teach our kids, educate our kids, and the young people that we encounter about our past. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Rhonda, I got two things that came to mind. Suffer the little children to come on to me and pick me the standard. Sometimes we have to be tactical in our approaches. We can't suffer the children for the sins of their parents. While they are yet children, the parents are responsible for them. The parents will make decisions to them what they could partake in and not partake in. That doesn't mean that they love you any less. That doesn't mean they respect you any less. And if a child will turn up at your door, your gate for something that you would normally give them, a piece of cake, a piece of cane, whatever it is, and then because the parents make certain decision, you punish them for that, not good enough. Yeah? I know $1 million some people that don't like me, but everything I have for children, I will invite their children. And invite them to. Right? Sometimes you can't be too petty. Call it live. Thank you for holding.
Pleasant good morning to you, Gaddafi and Brother Ines. My simple contribution is that I believe the current crop of leadership in the coalition, PNC, EFC, I don't know where we are right now, but within recent times, the leadership is not very inspiring. And if they're a seasoned politician or people who want to be seasoned politicians, if they're monitoring the mood of the people, or if they're close to the ground and give the people listening here, they will pick up. And I know this at times as an experienced and seasoned politician and as an educator, is picking up the vibes from the people on the ground. But there's a lot of disenchantment among the people who are not supportive of the PPP, but they're not. But in terms of an alternative, the opposition is not giving them that alternative that they are looking for. They're looking for some form of leadership. And the recent local government election shown that people were disenchanted with the PP, so some of them stay away, so you saw the PP votes went down. But also you saw the coalition votes went down as well, which allowed the PP to come up in some of the areas, because the stronghold of the coalition, even though they retained some of their areas, the votes went down and allowed the people to come up. So recently there was a straining of the mayors. So every time there are occasions where the opposition have an opportunity to pressure the government, and they're not taking those opportunities. And the recent one was the straining of the mayors and the deputy mayors. Now Now, you cannot have a government who boldly and brazenly saying that they're not going to engage you, they're not going to talk to you, they don't invite you to meeting, there's no discussion, there's no consultation. And you are saying that these people are in a style, you have disenchanted with the 2020 election. But yet you go in front of this man, yet you go in front of the president, stand up and say, I do straight to become the mayor, blah, 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 blah. Those things are disingenuous to the supporters of the coalition, and why it tells you that these people are only for their self-aggrandizement. They only care about themselves, and because they're proving daily that they only care about themselves, they're showing it in Parliament as well. People told them don't go in the Parliament after the debacle, still run and go. It tells you that they only care about themselves, and they're going to be on for it. They don't feel it if they're not listening to the people. And maybe the only hope is some great leader must rise up. People want leadership. This is how Hyde became famous. People were vets with Hyde after 92, 93. Then he became back famous again because he provided strong leadership towards the people. People need leadership. People don't need people walking around and feeling nice and talking and all this everything. They need to give the people leadership and representation. This is a job of a politician. If you can't do the job, you should go in the field. They go into the field to think about yourself. Is the people make you that in a pain? The people make you go in Parliament. The people make you town mayor. And if you only thinking about yourself in this struggle, well then they don't feel it, and maybe the only hope is maybe another by 2025. Some great leaders on the rise up from God and inspire somebody to rise up to be a great leader to take on his people. Because the current crop, they're not very inspiring. They're very, very selfish. Over. Thanks.
Thank you for your call. Dr. Hines, you want to respond to anything here?
No.
The lines remain open. 6225933 is the number to call.
I just want to say the first caller who talked about the relationship between economic power and cultural affirmation is right on spot. Economic power become leverage in terms of your culture becoming part of the national culture. And in Guyana, we don't have collective economic power, and so we don't have leverage in terms of competing, because remember, there are competing groups and competing cultures in Guyana, and we don't have economic power. So when we compete, we don't have much leverage, and that is why I'm saying the PNC will have to undergo some change in its approach to governance when it gets back into power, because the PPP is not going to empower African Guyanese economically. Let me say this before people beat me up. No group anywhere in the world become empowered economically without the help of the state. Whether it's white people in America with the Indian Removal Act that give poor white men land so that they can achieve the American dream. Wherever you go, the state facilitates economic empowerment for groups. And so if African Guyanese are going to become empowered, the state has to open up space and facilitate. The Indian government, Indian Guyanese-led government, is not going to do that for black people. Because if you empower black people economically, you're empowering your political opponents. So they're not going to do it. All right? And it goes against their thesis of domination. It is left to the PNC/black-led government to facilitate African Guyanese empowerment. And like I said, from Hoyt to Granger, they never operated with that thesis in mind. And a coming black government, black-led government, will have to change that attitude and accommodate African Guyanese economic empowerment. Not, you see, when I talk about African Guyanese economic empowerment, I am not saying you must do that at the expense of Indian or Amerindian empowerment. That's not what I'm saying at all. So it's not about taking anything from Indians and giving it to black people, right? It's about the distribution, the distributive thesis. That is, you distribute resources in such a way that those who are behind get a chance to catch up. And a PNC-led government has to move in that direction if black people are going to become economically empowered in Guyana. They have to move. And when I say that there's something wrong with the non-racial approach, I'm making a distinction between racial and racist. Racial is a recognition of our racial groups in the society and our racial diversity. That is, race is real, racial identity is real. And so therefore, any governance in the country has to take into consideration the racial identities of the groups. That is distinct from racism. Racism is when you use your power to give one group superiority over the other. That's not what I am talking here about. I'm saying that the government has to recognize where Amerindians are, where Africans are, and implement policies so that they can catch up economically with the other groups in the society. And any new PNC government or PNC-led government has to move in that direction, or black people are going to remain where we are.
Thank you. Caller, thank you for holding.
Morning, Kadaki, and morning, Dr. Hinds, and morning, Guyana. I'd like to also big up Rhonda Lane, Guyana woman warrior. I would like to start with appeasement, and it seems like for us, we are always accommodating and appeasing others. And it is something that I've talked about, and we seems to can't get out of being nice to people who continuously kick us day in and day out. So a previous caller mentioned we don't have economic power, but in some aspect we do, or buying power. When we can refuse to patronize racist mafia PPP elements, we choose not to, and we possibly don't want to see it that way. I go back with the appeasement of, say, a Nelson Mandela, when his conditional release, as far as I know, was to not do what Mugabe had did in Zimbabwe to the white farmers. And even when he and the ANC came to power, it was kind of status quo. We still have, after 30 years or so, South Africans, still living in abject poverty because of the ANC didn't implement taking away lands that the racist apartheid government confiscated and have for their own. We go back to, not to a knock on Lincoln Lewis, but I believe I heard in their ancestral land, they even let Indians stay on it. And these same Indians are claiming that that's part of an appeasement type of mentality we have, right? So we come now to Granger and Hoyt, and we simply do not want to we make it appear that we don't want to make it look bad that we are doing this stuff for our people who've been traditionally disenfranchised and be at the bottom of the ladder. So we will be scared to do things to correct or to provide redress. So coming back to Guyana now, and I heard Dr. Hines say we don't want to do stuff in a racist way. So how then do we correct or provide redress for the 20-something years that the PPP have been giving their Indian people all the state resources while leaving back the Africans? So isn't the solution to do the same thing that they did to you? We can now come in and when we're in government to now start at the middle, right? These people already have advantage. So you can now come in and then say, well, let's share 25% of the pie when they already have gotten 75%. So my solution is you've got to empower to the hilt your people. And you've got to lay it out on the line and say, hell, for the past X amount of years, this is what's been going on with the PPP and their distribution. So when you're in there, you got to now come back with your 75% of state resources to your people. But we are so scared to do that because we're going to be called racist. The PPP don't care about that. So we are always appeasing, right? Everyone else, Indian, whites, everybody else. And we can't take care of our own. So again, for redress for the past 26 years now, my solution is you stop all of these contracts to the Indian people. Until we play catch up, that's when they're going to be led back into this pot. And that's my take. We simply cannot be appeasing, and the PNC party are simply, to me, they're not going to change the ways, because look at what opposition have done so far. In my opinion, they've been appeasing. The PPP took away their monies for them to run their side of the aisle. And what happened? Did anything get done about getting their, rightful share? Come on, we have been appeasing these people too much, and we have taught that to our children. So then when the youngsters come up, we're going to be doing the same thing. And we've got to put a full stop to that. And until we do that, we're forever going to be in the same position. And I think for Africans all over, we have a universal problem, and it is called stupidity. And that's my take.
Thank you for your call. Tali Live, good morning.
Neighbor, morning, neighbor. Let me tell you something, neighbor. Sometimes we just be the contributors of we own little challenges and we own little destruction and them kind of thing. And I said, for put it in a nutshell, I would say that I feel very much appreciated for how you handle the situation just now with the system. Because you don't go certain speed, go over certain boundaries and things. This is it for them. And next thing I ask you, my brother, because this thing don't really good sound too nice. It is end up getting the program dreary and that kind of thing. People have to understand that this program is a 1 hour program, though you might go over and them kind of thing. And please must take some control, or brother Coffee. This is serious. Please must take some control, or brother Coffee, because when you say jump up on my program, I just want to hear people with this calling thing. It is very important to people, and I just want to hear other people's views and that kind of thing. You understand? Brother Coffee got to understand for put this thing in a nutshell and hit it home and don't allow this thing to get dreary and you see the views start going down and all them kind of thing. This is serious. It happened to the first night, Brother Hinds come on. It was so good on them thing. Cause about the coffee, we get people and get their chance. And it is end up being dreary, my brother. You understand? We're hinting this thing all the time and them kind of things supposed to be big enough to understand what's going on. So please take some control of it too. And I'm glad if you're listening, you understand that the people feel drawn out when he talking. Not that he don't say things of, of importance. But then you have to know for nip it in a bud, man. Nip it in the bud, put it in a nutshell, and people are going to understand the social media age, we the in it, and everybody know what is going on too. It's appreciated, but you never stay so long from program, man. Have a blessed day, brother. Dr. Hinds, have a blessed one too.
Thank you, Carlo. Call it live, good morning. Call it live, good morning.
Hello?
Caller, you are live. Good morning.
Yes, good morning to you. Good morning, Dr. Hinds. Good morning to all my black brothers and sisters. This is Floods Garden. Dr. Hinds, I want to mention this to you. Do you know, I just need an answer, yes or no. Do you know, why I will mention this to you this morning? Because you are a frequent flyer on a show with Caribbean Airline like me, Flat Garden. Do you know about the program with frequent flyer that when you communicate certain points, you are entitled for a round trip ticket? Do you know that?
Yes.
Okay, so I will assume. No, don't assume because you said yes to that question. So, are you signed up to that program so you could get your round trip ticket when you communicate that figure? What will qualify you? Yes?
Yes.
Good. So, Flat Garden, put it outside to all my black brothers and sisters because the election coming soon. So, those who have green cards and don't know about the frequent flyer, and you guys travel a lot of time, like 3 years, and you guys communicate that. If you all don't know, get into the program so you all could get a free ticket to travel to Guyana. Those who have green cards, so you all could come back home and represent and help to put the cabal out of office. Because Flat Garden tried. I just put my money where my mouth at. When I had my green card, I used to travel and come home and vote. So I'm encourage all Guyanese, even to those who are outside that program, encourage the brothers and sisters, those who have green cards. If you all really need a change, I want to help our black brother and sister who is in Guyana. We will make sacrifice and come home and vote and put your vote between WPA and PNC because those are the two parties stinking for us today. Let me repeat myself. Those are the two parties stinking for us. And what my grandmother teach me from the age of 9, she said, my grandson who stink for me, I will rattle for them. And now if those two parties stink for us every day, every second, we must rattle for them. Like, forget about AFC. AFC was and still a disaster to black people today up to now. Some may like it and some may not like it, but take it to the bank. Because let me say why I'm saying this today. Because Chawanda said in his brother basement that when Ramzatan put these words to him and said, I will give you a job for MP, he said no. Ramzatan said, why? Because I have Canadian citizen. Ramzatan said, don't worry with that. Both parties in the all got citizenship sitting inside there. Ramzatan is to blame what happened to black people today. He's part of it, not only Gunja Prasad. He's part of it. Because you know the Constitution. You went to school before Flat Garden, university, you read the Constitution before Flat Garden, and you couldn't allow that nonsense. And today, you are fighting for the present government, for work with the Constitution. When you destroy it, when you encourage Sarandas to do that nonsense. And plus, you go so far and give him escort from there to the airport for he leave peacefully. My black brother and sister, listen to Flat Garden this morning. Beware of AFC. Ramzatan showed the brilliant black people them under the bus again. Don't cut me off, let me finish. When he used the word and said, left for him, me Ramzatan, me, this is Kenyan brother, I will never leave AFC. Flat Garden barn night, but ni barn last night, Ramzatan. He take up himself and show them black brothers and sisters under the bus. Because he said, but it is the board members them vote for leave the coalition. We all know that AFC cannot win PPP by themselves. Why he walk out? In the first place, he's the boss. Why he introduce them for vote and come to a table? We got to be careful with AFC, my black brothers and sisters. Thank you for your time. I will talk the rest tomorrow.
Thank you for your call. Call it live. Good morning. Caller, you are live. Good morning.
Good morning, Kodaki, and good morning, Dr. Hinds. I just want to say two things. First of all, thank you for continuing to bring awareness to our brothers and sisters, our African brothers and sisters in Guyana. And secondly, I didn't know that the APARTHEID had a credit union, but that's okay. The other thing I want to say is that what about a black bank? It not necessarily have to be Guyana alone. It could be Caribbean. It could be universal. What about a black bank? Something got to start somewhere before it becomes, they say we start with one step and then it could become a big movement. So thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, caller.
Amen.
Dr. Hinds, it's 2 minutes to 9. Kindly wrap up.
Well, we used to have a black bank. I'd set up a black bank, Globe Trust, and all kinds of internal and external pressures. But we need a black bank in Guyana. If not a bank, some kind of institution where black people can have access to capital. I know of at least 2 initiatives that have been worked on by African Guyanese. I'm not at liberty to divulge because I am not part of them, but I know that there are a couple of initiatives in that direction. So let's keep our fingers crossed that black people can, in short order, have access to capital to get into businesses. Again, the discussion that we've had this morning is very important. And I continue to say that these discussions are not meant to say to people all is lost, but they're meant to let our people understand the real situation. Because I think if people understand what we're up against, then they are better placed to understand some of the difficulties and to come up with suggestions to our leaders as to how we can deal with the situation. One caller mentioned Mandela, and I wanted to make a point. Mandela was faced with the same thing that Burnham was faced with, and that is the flight of white capital. Mandela had to be very careful that he didn't move as rashly as some radicals wanted him to move, because the likelihood of the white people in South Africa at that time taking their money and leaving South Africa was real. They did it in Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe moved from one of the richest economies in Africa to one of the poorest because they took their capital and left. And so Mandela had to be tactical. My problem is that over time with the ANC, tactic became strategy. It became the thing. So I will not fault Mandela, you know, in the same way that I wouldn't fault Burnham for, in a sense, appeasing Indians, because if the Indians had taken their capital and left when Burnham took power in the 60s, that would have made life difficult for us. And so I could understand Burnham's tactics of appeasement. My problem is that the tactic became a strategy under Hoyt, and it still remains a strategy. So we always have to balance accommodating those with the capital, those with the skills that you need for development that your community doesn't have, but also ensuring that you build up the skill set and build up the capital within your community. It's a balancing act that I think has to be done. I think that is the challenge that is facing North now, that if the PNC, when the PNC, and hopefully other parties, I hope our party will be part of that, when we get back into power, that we address the question of the inequality in the distribution of resources, and that we address the question of the relative lack of resources in the Black community. Now, you don't have to break any law to do that. The evidence is there. Black people were dispossessed for 200 and odd years during slavery. Based on that alone, any state would be justified in having pointed programs aimed at bringing Black people up to speed. Right? So you're not breaking any law, you're not discriminating against anybody. The evidence of unpaid labor for over 200 years is compelling reason for any state to deal with it. The United States, like I said, as segregated as it was, it did consider 40 acres and a mule. It didn't deliver. But then 100 years later, it implemented affirmative action. And although they did not go the full gamut, affirmative action did have a positive effect on creating a Black middle class, and including in that was a small Black entrepreneurial class, you know, and it allowed education and skills in the Black community and so forth. So I'm saying that North nor any Black leader should not be scared that they'll be called racist, because there is justification for lifting the Black community out of the economic doldrums, right? And I continue to say that you don't have to discriminate against others to do that. I am not in favor of discriminating against others. Does it mean that others will get less? Yes. If you're balancing a system, the scales will have to come down and the scales will have to go up. So yes, the disproportionate resources that are going to other communities will decrease. So it's not about taking from them. It's about leveling the playing field. And you're not taking from anybody. but you're just left in the playing field. And I think Aubrey Norton's PNC has to sit down and think through these things. I have to say, we in the WPA are doing that. I can say that publicly. We are thinking through these things as to how, in the face of the wealth that we have, we can solve the historic problems. And that is why we are putting some policy things on the table. We have already put the cash transfer, which we think is a democratic way of dealing with poverty across the board. But that would not be enough. That would not be enough. You need other pointed policies. And we are thinking through those things in anticipation that we would be called upon to manage a government, we hope, in the near future. You see? And so you have to begin to think through those things. And what has to change is not just a little thing here, a little thing there. What has to change is our praxis, meaning our thought and our practice. For them to the two together, you get praxis. Our thought about governance, about development, has to undergo some change, some adjustment. Because we are in a new era. Issues that we didn't confront in the past, we have to confront. The empowerment of Africans cannot wait. The disempowerment of Africans, in a sense, is a disincentive to develop in a multi-ethnic society. You can't develop with one race. South Africa found that out. And they had to bring an end to apartheid. America found that out. It had to bring an end to legal segregation. Israel is going to find that out in short order. You see how many Israelis are on the streets? Because you cannot continue to have large sections of your society disempowered and dispossessed and expect you can have development. It's not going to be development. It will be something else. And so we have to settle that question. So it's a challenge to all of us, to the PNC, to the WPA, to the black organizations, cultural organizations. It's a challenge to those of us in the diaspora. Can we continue to have groups that are sending barrels home? Or do our diasporan groups reorient their resources towards encouraging development, investment, businesses within our communities? You see? So all of us have to engage in an adjustment, because Guyana has changed because of oil. But that change is not going to automatically lead to development unless we are thinking it through. The PPP is thinking it through, but they're thinking it through in a one-sided way. They're thinking it through a grand ideology of domination. The ideology of domination cannot lead to sustained development. It has not been done anywhere in the world. Short term, yes. Sustained, no. Just look at Guyana. Look at the level of crime. Look at the level of crime. That's an indicator. Look at the level of crime. Look at the level of deaths on the road, which doesn't have to do with anything else but indiscipline and the breakdown of law and order. If you have a breakdown of law and order in governance, it seeps down. One just have to drive the road in Guyana and see, and you recognize that here are people who are not, when they sit behind that wheel, they're not driving with law and order in mind. It's a jungle. I'm telling you, I'm scared sometimes to go in my car and drive on the streets, you know, because once you go, there's a jungle. And the government, because it governs as if it's in a jungle, can do nothing about what's happening on the roadways, can do nothing about crime, because it is not thinking about development in holistic terms. It's thinking about development in narrow terms. And once you think about development in narrow terms, you're going to get those negative spin-offs. One, I can't object to a 4-lane highway, but I am from a village, and I see what cars do in driving through my village on a 1-lane road. Sometimes I deliberately, when I'm driving in my village, I just drive slowly, because that's what you should do. Here you are on small roads, children, old people, and boom! And I deliberately slow down, and they blow and blow. You know, and I can take the chance and do that in my village. But I wouldn't do that in Georgetown or a place, because road rage, they may kill me. You know? So, when one is now talking about a 4-lane highway and talking about development, one wonders whether that 4-lane highway would lead to development or it would lead to more carnage. And as a government, you have to think those things through. And so, I am urging all of us in the opposition to begin to think through these overriding issues in the society. And I'm saying that the disempowerment of African Guyanese as a group, Amerindians as a group, has to be dealt with at the structural level, because though that disempowerment is structural, and to solve them, it has to be structural, right? Now, there is Indian poor people, and we have to deal with the question of the Indian poor. And the question of the Indian poor has to be dealt with policies such as the cash grant, where you're giving resources to each household regardless of race, all right? But the Indian poor, at present, under the policies of the PPP, I don't want to say they are in a better place than Africans and Amerindians, but they're not in the same place. Because to say better, one will give the impression that the Indian poor is doing well, right? But they're in a different place. That is, their relationship to poverty is different from the relationship to poverty in the Black community, Amerindian community. The Indian poor can use the power of their vote and support for the PPP and leverage more crumbs. And, you know, the more the crumbs come, it becomes a lump. So then the Indian poor, they're getting lumps, no? While the Amerindian and Africans are getting crumbs, you know? So if one makes that analysis, rather than say, well, Indian people are poor too. Yes, but the Indian poor, they're getting lumps. And so the policy that you're going to use for Amerindians and Africans will have to be different. Even Amerindians are in the hinterland. Blacks are in urban areas. And so your policies have to take into consideration the spatial location of the groups, right? The urban poor can't go in your backyard and plant a garden to help to subsidize your poverty. If you're poor in the rural areas, you're more likely to do that. There are more of opportunity. So there are all these things. We have to face the fact that we are a diverse society. We have to face the fact that we are a diverse society. Our circumstances are similar in some regards, but they are different in some regards. And policy has to speak to that diversity And that is the error. I think it's a willful error on the part of the PPP. But I think the PNC, which is wedded to this one tide lifts all, I am pleading with them to begin to think through that policy, begin to think it through, because it is not sustainable. It is not sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hines, and thank you, viewers, for tuning in. It is now 16 minutes past the 9 o'clock hour. Let me just remind you that tonight is Politics 101 as usual. And tomorrow you can join me for another program of Guyanese Morning Time right here on Kams TV. Right, remember, tomorrow is the symposium at the Tipperary Hall. That's 6:30 in the evening. Come down and let's and partake in the annual UC GUYANA Emancipation Symposium. The following day, the 11th, send your children down here at Club Twilight and let's talk things cultural with them. Good? And of course, the 27th of August, we get a quick party. Come, let's keep the culture alive. If you need further information on these matters, you can WhatsApp me on 6225933. I'll be